Hello and welcome back to Mental Music. Welcome back to episode 5. Today I am joined by a really interesting person who I've recently got into contact with. His name is Max Garrard. He's a performance coach at Royal Birmingham Conservatoire, and he's very kindly agreed to come on and talk to me today about what he does and the types of things that he does for performance coaching at RBC. So Max, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you. Good to be here.
It's weirdly, I don't think I've talked to many Maxes in the past 5 years. It's a very unusual space to be in. But yes, again, thank you for joining me. To start us off, could you describe in your own words what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I've at Conservatoire, my kind of role is performance coach and mentor, or performance coaching and psychology, and I work with students quite a lot on an individual basis to begin with, and it's an elective, it's a supporting study that people can choose to come and work with me. And a lot of the time I work with students and we talk about performance anxiety, and my idea with them is to find strategies and ways you can't get rid of performance anxiety, but it's a case of managing it so we can achieve our highest level of performance whilst still feeling the effects of anxiety, but managing it in such a way that it becomes less inhibiting.
Brilliant. And obviously, alongside that, you're also a classical musician in your own right. You're a French horn player, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm a member of the Welsh National Opera. I play fourth horn in the orchestra there. I joined there last year, or 2019 now. And before that, I was in Opera North for 8, nearly 9 years. And before then, I was freelancing in London for another 8 or 9 years. So yeah, a bit of experience to put into the mix as well. So that's the idea, I think, for me, is to be somebody who experiences the pressures and the strains and auditions and the trials and orchestral performances that it brings on things like performance anxiety. So my position there is that I'm somebody on the inside. That's kind of always what my aim has been.
And that's a brilliant aim, because I think from conversations that I've had, and actually particularly with a couple of people I've interviewed before, for listeners going back to episode 1 or 2 with Abby or Layla, there was this idea that even when there is help that is kind of advertised, it's more from general counselling, and it can be quite hard to connect in that way of music specifically. So I think it's a fantastic thing to actually have people like yourself who are like, we know how the game works. We're here to help on that, in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's in my mind, it's been a really important aspect to it. To be somebody, as I say, on the inside. I think it might give an element of trust to other musicians, that they do know they're talking to somebody who's been through all these difficult times and has found ways and basically on studying the subject and all that kind of thing, a useful person to go and talk to about these things.
Absolutely. So what kind of prompted you in the first place to take an interest in kind of psychology and the psychological effect aspect of performance as a whole?
Well, whilst I was freelancing, actually, I've been working 5 or 6 years in the orchestral world, and I just found it fascinating to begin with, how you through orchestras you see a huge cross section of people and different personalities that are attracted to different instruments, different personalities that play in a particular way, and then you kind of observe a little bit, and you kind of think, how does that person approach this performance as opposed to that person, and why does that person find it easier or more difficult to do this than the other person. And so I just really wanted to get on the other side of performance and almost give something back, really. I just had a feeling that I wanted to broaden out and give a bit more than only playing, but at the same time be a player.
Brilliant. Yeah. From that, I suppose, what kind of things do you even, first off, because I imagine from looking at performance from a psychologist perspective, what were kind of some of the first things that you even started noticing about your own playing? Because I imagine that some of those early bits that you would have realised are, oh, that's why I do such and such.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think I started to have a real feeling about that side of things for myself, probably through auditions, actually, because that's, I think, as a musician, as a classical musician at least, that's one of the probably the most stressful things you have to go through, is to stand in front of a panel of professional musicians and prove your worth, really, or so you perceive, at least. And so, yeah, I think for myself, I thought, well, in difficult audition, you do a bad audition, say, you think, well, why was that bad? And you analyse why that was bad, and you think, well, what do I want it to be like, ideally? So you kind of trying to go through processes of managing your own thought processes and try to construct things for yourself mentally that actually this could be a useful thing. So I drew on various things. Sports psychology is one thing I think is really adaptable to performing under pressure. So little techniques from there, and through my own studies in psychology, and I started to build things for myself in that way. I think that hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And I think auditions are a real weird one, I've found, because I mean, as a saxophonist, I do much less of orchestral work, as is the nature of the beast. And so for me, auditions can often be very much different from the last. And so there can be much less in common. Weirdly, there's just been some points of like, they get surprisingly fun after a while if you've got the right mindset to them. But yeah, there's a whole depth of it can go into, and it's also very interesting that that there's actually quite a fair few parallels that you can get from sports and sports psychology. And both parallels also in the lack of some help in some regards to do with sports.
I think in sports, I think that a lot you hear it a lot that once you're ready physically, once you get to that level, it becomes more like 90% mental and 10% your physical ability to get to achieve success. And I think that's that's quite an extreme degree that they refer to in that way, but I think there's a lot to be said for that. Even you can be the best player in the world in the practice room, but turn up on stage for a solo recital or a high pressure orchestral situation or an audition, you can be a completely different player, and that's where the mental side comes in, and the preparation can really help. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with performance coaching, and it's like bridging the gap between the practice room and the platform, the performance situation.
So how do you tend to start making that bridge between the two? Like, because you run these sessions as part of electives, and for non-conservatoire listeners, electives are kind of essentially extracurricular activities for us as music students. So how do you tend to start when working with individuals on dealing with things such as performance anxiety, be it for if they were working towards like a recital or performance class or something similar?
Yes, it's a good question. I mean, everybody's different, but usually I would, if someone's saying that I'm really worried about this audition coming up, and whenever I go and audition, this is what happens, and I would take it back and say, right, how do you go about your preparation? And they'll talk to me about, you know, what they do or they don't do, and we'll try to, like I say, come right back to beginning. So if they got an audition, it can be a long time ahead, and I think the preparation is crucial in all this, and things like practicing in a way, your personal practice, in a way that is bringing in a particular mindset that you want to start to build in a performance situation. So you're putting these things into context as much as you can, and there are lots of different things you can do, like visiting a particular venue that you might be playing an audition in, wearing a particular clothes, rehearsing at the right time of the day, all sorts of things. You can go from a very sort of basic practical level like that to later on start to build in visualization techniques, and other mental kind of processes that we can start to use. And I think another really good thing with students that I work with is that after seeing them for an individual session to get their own kind of, it's all tailor made, as it were. So I assess each student as they come to me and see what they do need and everything. And then what's really effective is that I can get, with their permission of course, these individuals into groups, and we simulate performance situations as far as we can. So we get a decent space, we set up ourselves as a panel, like an audition or whatever it might be, and I get each student to perform something. And then we take it back and say, right, we analyse that a bit, and then we try it again. And it's like building this thing into context so that they train their kind of subconscious that they have been there before. And so the idea is to, when it comes to the performance, is that they've trained themselves in that actually I can do this. I know I've done it under pressure, and it's possible. It becomes possible, and they start to believe in themselves.
That's really insightful. I really like that you put people into groups, because I think it's probably also a thing of, in a slightly less intimate setting, say with a performance class or such, you'd still get similar comments of speaking about like playing afterwards, and people being like, "Oh, you didn't seem nervous at all," but I think often you can get into a training thought of just being like, they're just saying that to be nice, or they're just saying it to get through like the performance class because we've got like 4 or 5 other people to go. So it can sometimes feel like run of the mill. So I really like that you get to recreate that, but then in a more intimate setting.
Yeah, and I think it's the whole thing with that is to give each student enough time to absorb the situation, to absorb the atmosphere, the kind of feel the performance anxiety, feel those feelings, and get used to it, and so that you learn how it develops in that time period. And then we do it again, and I make them do it again a number of times, so they each get a good slot, and by the end of it, usually they've reached a point where they felt comfortable, and getting to that position is really important, because that can again train them and teach them that they can get to that feeling of feeling more comfortable in that difficult situation, and hopefully they can take that away and say, that is how I can feel under pressure.
Yeah. Do you ever, with students who you work with, do you ever get students who are clearly dealing with something that is performance anxiety related, but there's almost a disconnect with that? Because even though to my mind and from my experience, when we talk about mental health at conservatoire, performance anxiety is definitely the best talked about in our cycles because it's the most obviously related, but it still definitely has some stigma to it. Do you ever get some people who you work with who are just like, oh no, that's just what happens, and there's not much that can be done about it? Do you ever experience anything like that?
Often I get somebody will come along and say, this is just how it is. This is how I am. There's no way that I can get to where I want to be. But there's always a way in. I think that's something that I could say to students that are thinking about this. That there's usually a little way in to find something, and even such a small thing you can start to build on. Like so often, somebody will, students will be, and professionals and musicians throughout the world. We're excellent at criticizing ourselves. And with that becomes an inflexibility, and when we perform, we can become too rigid and too set our goals and expectations too high, or not too high, but unrealistic, or to the level of perfection kind of thing, which is unhealthy because we can't get there. So try, this is a very, very common thing. And just on a very basic level, trying to help students to build in a little bit of flexibility and accepting of some imperfections, and that is often the first way in. And just to think, oh yeah, actually, I am allowed to make mistakes. And as soon as people realise that's a really nice first step to make, and suddenly they become a little bit more flexible in themselves, and unironically, when they believe they're allowed to, when they allow themselves to be imperfect, to make mistakes, they make fewer mistakes.
Yeah, that's a lovely way of putting it. And I don't know if you agree with me on it, but I guess some of that comes from, certainly to my mind, and one of the things is a bit of a pet peeve, I suppose, is sometimes being at a conservatoire is quite a competitive environment.
Very much so.
Even when we're not meaning to, and when we're certainly in a world when we're not completely locked down, when the building is full, which I long for those days again. Yeah. You're hearing everybody at the same time, and so it's almost subconsciously competitive.
Yeah, I think another point with being a musician or artist, or certainly in our world, is that doing what we do is such a personal thing as well, and it's very hard to say have a bad performance and leave it in the office, as it were, and you can take it around with you, and then you start to believe that other people are seeing you in a different way, because it's personal to you, and so you think that if you perform badly, that's you as a person being a bad person or whatever, or changing people's attitudes towards you as a human being. And it's really important to try and get away from that for yourself, and also recognizing that in other people as well. So I think, like you say, it's being at a music conservatoire, it can be a hugely competitive environment. We're all in this melting pot together, but I think it's so important to try to create a more healthy environment, and be good to each other, and form support, be supportive to people and understanding, because no performer has ever had a clear run, has always been good. We've always had a difficult moment here or there, and it's important to recognise that in other people.
Absolutely, there is. Indeed, and actually something that really comes to mind is something that I don't really something that I've begun thinking about more and more, but I've been equating a lot of the time musicians' experiences to comedians, and I think it's that same thing of like you'll never meet a professional comedian who hasn't completely bombed at some point in their career. They've not been like extremely funny and extremely clever the whole time that they've been writing and performing. There's always been that like 10 person audience that wasn't even that interested. Like it just happens. And I think yeah, as we're saying, you know, there isn't, I don't think there's a musician alive who hasn't had a recital who's walked in and hasn't thought, oh, I wish there'd been a few more people in the seats.
Yeah, yeah, that's certainly an issue, I guess. And well, I think as musicians, I don't think it's necessarily about the number of people there, but I think it's about always giving your best, whatever it is, even if it's one man and the dog. You know, that's the cliche. But in terms of having a bad experience here or there, I think again a cliche is that a bad performance will teach you an awful lot, and so we take that with us as well. And then next time we try to, you know, think, well, what happened there? What can I do better? And that's the kind of learning process.
Failure is one of the ultimate teachers.
Well, absolutely.
So you've been a visiting tutor at RBC for 5 years now? 6 years now?
I think, yeah, 5 or 6. I think this is my 6th year.
Yeah, where has this past 12 months gone? But even just in that amount of time, have you noticed, if any, any general changes in the perception of receiving help from performance coaches like yourself for things like performance anxiety?
Yeah, I think. I think at the Conservatoire there's a really good outlook on health and well-being, and this started, you know, a while ago before I got to the Conservatoire, and I think there is a really good awareness of, you know, there's a health and well-being department which I'm part of, and I think there is a general really good attitude towards looking after students and making things available to students, and I think there is a good attitude with the students, as far as I can see, to do with performance anxiety, and but I think it's more of a general thing with the music business, is that it's becoming a bit less of a taboo subject, and barriers are slowly being broken down. I think there's a way to go yet.
Absolutely.
But I think again, I think sport is way ahead of music and the other arts in that regard. But I think it's taking, you know, it's a good example to follow. It's very commonplace for you know, you hear top athletes talking about their psychologist or whatever, and it's just normal. It's part of them understanding that they have to deal with the mental side of performing, and I don't think it's any different from us, for us rather.
Yeah, or it certainly shouldn't be.
No, absolutely, and you know, I think musicians and students, all musicians should understand and realise that there is a huge mental aspect to performance, and it's not just about practicing in the practice room and being thrown out there on stage. We need to look after the other side to it, which is a massive part of it, and without that, I think people find it quite difficult. You know, there are plenty of performers out there that could perhaps, you know, they don't feel that they perform their best under pressure, but they could do better. They could achieve higher levels for themselves if they were to pursue that sort of avenue as well.
Yeah. I mean, I have my thoughts on why it's still kind of a taboo as such. My main kind of view on it is that as a side to the arts and as a usually quite fast-paced business, it almost feels like you can get left behind if you seek help.
Right.
And that's certainly, that view mainly comes from my own experience, less so from a performing standpoint, but just in mental health in general, to be honest. But to my mind, it's a kind of view of, if I seek help, I'm getting behind, and then my practice will get behind, and then it's a very quick rolling down the hill of a spiral, essentially.
Right. Yeah. I think I've heard of people feeling like that. I think it's a shame that is kind of felt in some musicians, some artists, because I don't think it it really doesn't have to be like that at all. It should be. I've always thought that performing and the mental side of performing should work side by side. So neither one slows down the other, and so they kind of complement each other. So there's no being left behind, or because you don't have to stop one to look after the other. So the whole point is that they work together. But yeah, I hope that there aren't too many people that feel like that, and there's really no need to, because they really can work together and should work together.
Yeah, and then it comes to this idea of self-care in terms of the mental being it should be more of a proactive thing, and I think that's, I guess, what you're trying to aim towards as a view of, like, we shouldn't be reacting with the help. It should be a proactive thing that we just naturally do.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be a normal thing. It shouldn't be something abnormal that we go out of our way to do. It should be something that that is catered for, I guess. But again, that you say reactive, I think you're absolutely right. People tend to only go and seek help when they've got problems, or finding something difficult, or whatever. But actually, it's for everybody, even the top of the class, as it were. If people want to maintain this high level, we still need to look after this, the mental side to performance, to stay there and to maintain.
So, bringing ourselves to more of the now, I suppose. We've been in various stages of lockdown for the past 11, coming on 12 months soon.
Yeah.
How has coronavirus lockdown affected what you do as a coach, and has that changed what you see, or how much you see of people looking for help, or has that kind of shifted into different areas of, like, what you focus on?
Well, I suppose the direct impact in that way is that I haven't been seeing students face to face. I'm not able to do that. But also, I think students and musicians that aren't students, they're kind of seeing the fact that they're not performing as so they because they're not performing, they perhaps don't consider the need to talk about performance coaching directly, which refers back to your point of being reactive or proactive, which it's a bit of a shame, but it's the way it is these days. There is work to be done in terms of getting people to see that it is this thing that we should be doing as a normal thing, part of what we do as performers. But on the other hand, the online interviews and work that is now possible these days. I have been working with students in individual capacity, as well as some group situations at other places as well.
I think, though, talk of because as you said, we're performing less, so people talk about performance coaching less. One thing that has kind of emboldened and actually made me quite optimistic is, particularly over the start of like this more recent lockdown, when we started in mid-December, You can see my memory is getting terrible already, and it's only been 3 months of this one. But there was quite a nice surge of conversation, certainly in my department, and I know some others, around motivation, and it was really, it was really nice to see it, actually. People like just being able to be quite open and mature and honest about the struggles of being on a course, or like even just preparing for performance stuff whilst being shut down at home. And that's a really emboldening thing, because that discussion was going from, particularly the ones that we were having in my department, that was going right from postgrads talking about their experiences to first years who really haven't seen like much of the place or much of real professional experience at all.
Yeah, I think this has and continues to open people's minds in lots of different directions. This whole lockdown situation, people are exploring things that are beneficial to themselves. So yeah, I think it is doing some good in some ways, is getting people to think a bit about what they need to do in their lives, and some of those are pretty positive, really.
Indeed. So as a closing question, Max, I'd be curious to know, in your opinion, where would you like our discussions about performance coaching and mental health within music teaching and music industry to go in the next, say, 5 years?
I think I'd like to see over the next few years the psychological side of performing as something that is kind of needed on a kind of everyday basis. It should be seen as a kind of, or it shouldn't be seen as an abnormal thing that people think they have to go out of their way to seek help in secret, and feel that they're not allowed to admit things to people about anxiety and other performance related stresses or whatever they might be. And I really think that would be fantastic if it becomes like this norm, as it is in sport, where you can freely talk about these things. But also, I think awareness throughout the student population and our whole industry is a really important thing to recognise, just that, and so that there is this degree of support for people that are struggling, rather than this traditional feeling of being weaker for being nervous or whatever like that. But because I think everybody, however good they are or whatever level they are, they will experience feelings of anxiety, and we have to, at this stage, we're kind of muddling through to find a way that works. But if we don't have to sort of do anything in secret, as it were, or feel that we're not allowed to talk about it, then I think that's a real shame. I think it needs to move forwards in that way.
I agree wholeheartedly. The more we can talk about it, the more openly we can talk about it, and the less that we feel that we need to be taking a chance by being open about it.
Yeah, absolutely, and also that there are people that are in the industry, myself and many other people actually, that are becoming more commonplace, that are getting involved in offering support to other musicians, performers, and there is support there if you look for it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Max, for joining me today. That's been a really insightful conversation to have with you, and I'm sure people will get a lot from listening to that. So yeah, thank you for your time today. That's been fantastic.
Not at all. It's been great. Thanks for having me.
Excellent.